Hello, welcome to another episode of Her Head in Films. I'm Caitlin, and I'm your host. On this podcast, I share my thoughts and feelings about the films I watch. They tend to be art house and world cinema. What makes this podcast unique is that I weave together my life experiences with a personal and emotional discussion of film. I explore the impact that cinema has on me and why I connect so deeply to it. As I like to say, my head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films. Today's episode is about Frédéric Back's 1987 animated film, The Man Who Planted Trees. It tells the story of a humble French shepherd who plants thousands of trees over the course of decades and in the process revitalizes an entire region. It is a special little film. It's only 30 minutes. You can find it on YouTube. I suggest going and watching it if you haven't seen it yet, and then coming back and listening to my episode. This is one of my favorite films of all time, and it's also one of the most important films of my life. I can truly say that this film changed me in some kind of fundamental way, and I can't say that about every single film that I watch. I'm deeply passionate about cinema. And I'm passionate about how cinema can change our lives and affect us in very deep and emotional ways. As much as I love cinema, I can't have a life changing experience with every single film that I watch. But that's what happened with The Man Who Planted Trees. It's a simple story. It's based on a short story by the French writer Jean Giono. He wrote the story in the 1950s and it was published in Vogue magazine. Frédéric Back then did his animated adaptation in the 1980s. It's not a well known story. I don't think this is a well known film. I rarely ever see it mentioned. I just happened to come across it and to watch it about a year ago. And then I rewatched it recently and I realized with this second viewing, it just cemented what a masterpiece this film is and what an important story Jean Giono wrote. It affected me in such a profound way that that's why I wanted to do this episode and I wanted to talk about the film and I wanted to share my love for it and my passion for it because I think that this is a film about so many things. And I'm going to go into all the stuff that it makes me think about and that I think is so rich about the film. But I think at its core, it's a film about how to live. It's a film that inspires you to think about what kind of life you want to live, what you want to contribute to the world, how you want to leave this earth. Do you want to leave it better than you found it? Do you want to make the world a better place? And I know that we say these things and they're such big things. Like we all, when we're young, like when we're teenagers, and I was the same way when I was a teenager growing up in the early 2000s, I wanted to change the world. I was very political when I was very political at a young age. I was always paying attention to politics or news events. Well, maybe saying I was political is not the best way to describe it. I cared about other parts of the world. I wanted to know what was happening on other continents and in other cultures. That was really important to me. I was curious about other people all around the world. I wasn't just focused on my little bubble in the United States. I grew up in North Carolina in a pretty small town. I always thought beyond that. I think I always had an expansive curiosity about the world. And I think when we're very young, we have lofty ideals. I want to change the world. I want to change things. And I think as people get older, they get disillusioned and they lose hope that things will change. And I think for me, that certainly happened. There is certainly disillusion. But I think what I've realized as I've gotten older is that you cannot change the entire world and you can't save the world, whatever that means. All you really have control over is the immediate surroundings where you live and where you are, for the most part. And the tangible difference that you can make is there in your own community, in the way that you treat your family, your friends, the people around you, how you interact with people, and what you contribute that way. That is the most immediate way that you can have a positive impact, perhaps. Volunteering, helping other people in that way. And then I think there are other ways that you can affect the world. For me, that's been through sharing online and through this podcast specifically. I've tried to have a voice. I've tried to share my passions. And I think that that's had some kind of effect, although very small, on some people around the world. So our impact, it's complex, but we don't just change the entire world, do we? That's not possible. And you can't make that your goal, that you're just going to change everything. You're going to change the world or you're going to save the world. I think there is something to be said about small acts, and that's what I think this film is about. It's about how you live your life, what you want to contribute, and the seeds that you want to plant or the acorns that you want to plant. And it's about how you can be small and you can be ordinary and you can have a very small impact, perhaps, but that it can be meaningful. Those small acts can be meaningful. When you are kind to someone going through a difficult time, you don't know how that could affect that person the rest of their lives, the way that they might remember you. Me recording an episode about a film, I don't know what effect that could have. I've had people reach out to me at times and tell me that my episodes helped them through a difficult time in their lives. I never envisioned that when I started this podcast in 2016. So the seeds that we plant and the things that we contribute and the ripples that we make in the world can be invisible and unseen, or they can seem slight, but you don't know the impact you could have on other people. I don't believe that our lives just stop with us. I do believe that we are interconnected and that we touch the people around us, whether we know it or not. We have an impact on each other. We are affected by each other. And I think this film asks us to consider, what kind of impact do you want to have? How do you want to leave this world? What condition do you want to leave it in? How do you want to make the world a better place? Not the entire world, but the parts that you have control over. And I think I just can't name a lot of films that make me think about that make me think about the kind of person I want to be, what I want to leave behind, the seeds that I want to plant. I think about teachers a lot because when I was in school, I was very affected by some teachers that I had, particularly some of the English teachers. But I had a class in high school about film. It was a film appreciation class, and the teacher who taught it profoundly affected my life. And that class was like a seed that got planted for me and blossomed into this podcast and my passion for film that I share. But teachers have an effect on all the students that they teach. And in a way, they are planting seeds, planting acorns. And I think a lot of us have been affected by different teachers that we've had. A teacher can inspire you to go into a particular profession or take a certain path in your life. And then everybody who you affect, that teacher has also affected, because if you'd never had that teacher, you never would have taken that path. So that comes to mind as well. There are all kinds of ways that we can affect other people, artists, poets, but also nurses and doctors. And there's different ways that you can influence other people. And you can influence them in harmful and negative ways, or you can influence them in nourishing and positive ways. And it can just be small things. It can be creating a community garden. It can be volunteering um, at a shelter. There's all kinds of ways that you can have an effect in the world. It can just be writing online about your experiences or your life. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. The thing about the man who planted trees is that he's planting these small acorns, and he does it for decades, and he plants thousands of them. And most of them, or at least half of them, don't even survive. He has to plant thousands and thousands of acorns. And I love the way that the story is told. And I actually got the book by Jean Giono, the source material. This is the story that the film is based on. And it pretty much adapts the story word for word. You could open the book and listen to the narration of the film as you're reading the book. It's almost like an audio book brought to life. And the copy of The Man Who Planted Trees that I purchased has these beautiful engravings, these beautiful images by Michael McCurdy. They're very just wonderful. I love the way the story's told, because the shepherd is not narrating the story. A young man meets the shepherd shortly before the First World War. He meets this very humble man who lives in a humble cabin and who collects these acorns and then goes and plants them. The shepherd's name is Elziard Bouffier. We learn that he's lost his wife and his son. We don't know the circumstances of it. We only know that he lost them at some point. He's an older man. And so it's this very beautiful story of a younger man who's narrating the story, meeting the shepherd, and he's affected by Elziard Bouffier himself. And so it's this story about a younger person meeting an older person and being affected by their life. We don't know exactly everything that's happened to Elziard Bouffier. What happened to his wife and his son? We only know that they're gone. And it seems to me that his grief is one of the reasons why he starts to plant these acorns. That was something that really stood out to me when I rewatched the film recently. And when I read the actual story itself and read the book, I read it in one sitting a few nights ago. It's only about 50 pages, so it's very short because it was really a short story. And what struck me about reading it this time and then rewatching the film is that this shepherd starts to plant these acorns as a way, I think, to affirm life in the wake of death, in the wake of a devastating double loss of his wife and his son. He could retreat from the world. He could give up on life. He could lose hope in life. And instead, he decides to go toward life. And he decides to plant these acorns to try to revitalize the community, the town where he lives. And we learn that the people who are living in this community are very unhappy. There's a lot of drama. They're at each other's throats. the region itself seems to be dying. And his act of planting the acorns is a way for him to try to bring renewal and revitalization to this area. And that does end up happening as the story goes on, that once he plants these trees and they grow and grow over the years, that by the time the trees have grown and are at their fullest growth, that just as the trees have come to life and the region and the earth has been revitalized and renewed, so too has this community, that it's happier, that people live in more harmony with each other. But we meet the shepherd shortly before the First World War, and the young man telling the story goes off to fight in the First World War. And then when he comes back from war, he meets the shepherd. There are a few times when they meet. I find it very interesting that Elziard Bouffier plants these trees through both world wars. And we know that the First World War and the Second World War were catastrophic events. And when Jean Giono is writing this story, he's doing it in the 1950s, not that far removed from the Second World War, about a decade. And I think the fact that this shepherd plants these trees against the backdrop of war and destruction, I think that's a very powerful message about the value of life. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to be devoted to life. I went through a lot of trauma in my teens. I went through a lot of loss, and I had to confront very difficult things at an early age. I felt like for a very long time that trauma kind of trapped me in the world of the dead, and I couldn't escape it. I lost my father when I was a teenager. I lost my grandmother. I lost my maternal uncle, all within 3 years before I was 20 years old. I went to these funerals, and I was left shell shocked by it. I was left totally reeling. And then I didn't have the support and the care that I needed. And I was very abandoned by my family. And I only had my mom. We only had each other. And it was such a catastrophic time of my life, and it had such profound ripple effects, to the point where I've just struggled a lot in life, and I haven't known fully how to live. But I wanted to live, and I realize now that there was a life force within me that kept me alive, that kept me going, that my connection to art in particular, to film and music and books and poetry, that was the saving grace of my life. And so even though I lived sort of in this world of the dead, and I felt so shattered, and I felt like I was dying for a really long time and drowning, I do think that I was devoted to life without realizing it. It's like I couldn't fully get there though. And then in the last few years, a lot's changed. And I kind of had this awakening where I woke up from sort of the dissociation and the sleepwalking that I had been under for 18 years, honestly. Many, many years. I feel this renewed connection to life that I didn't have for a really long time. I see the sacredness of all life, the sacredness of the earth, the sacredness of the creatures that live on this earth, the sacredness of other human beings. And it's almost painful to feel it, because just as that shepherd lived during catastrophic times of violence and war, the First and Second World Wars, we also live in a time of destruction and violence, whether it's climate change and the extinction of so many species, and the destruction of forests, rainforest, and the degradation of the earth, the violence that we unleash in other parts of the world. The 21st century has just been soaked in blood. Afghanistan, Iraq, now Gaza, and the genocide that has taken place there. We have confronted, or we are confronting, an abyss. We are confronting an evil that I can't even put into words. And when you come up against that kind of death and destruction, that kind of worship of it, that's what it feels like at times, that particularly in America, American culture, American society, our government, just this worship of domination and violence and destruction and death, the death that we unleash through weapons. At this time, I think it is even more important to be devoted to life, to be connected to life. And when the shepherd plants those acorns, that is such a profound ritual of being devoted to life. He is planting something that he may not even ever see. He's planting something that may not even grow. And I love the use of acorns, and I've always loved trees. I loved trees since I was a little girl. I remember I had books about trees. I was always so enraptured by them. And I actually have a little glass acorn on an altar in my room. I love the image of the acorn. I love the symbolism of the acorn because in this tiny little thing, you have the blueprint for life. You have the blueprint for a tree, and trees are so vital to the earth, right? It's the reason we can breathe are because of trees. They nourish ecosystems. They are so essential. And they all start, every single tree has started as a little acorn. And every acorn has the potential to be a mighty, strong, powerful tree that sustains an entire ecosystem. I love that. I love that something so small can contain that much life inside of it. And that under the right conditions, if it's nurtured properly, then that little acorn can become such a magnificent structure. When he plants that acorn, it's an act of faith. It's an act of faith in life, in the future, in the belief that something can grow and that what he plants could contribute something to others. He will not even see those trees, probably. He gets to see some of them. And when he plants those acorns, it's just such a beautiful thought to me. It's just a reminder that, like, you don't know your impact. You don't know how you affect others. You don't know what they might remember about you. You don't know the effect that you might have. Again, I think about teachers. They don't know who that student will become because of them. And you have to live with not knowing what your impact could be. Sometimes you'll see it immediately, like when people send me a message about listening to an episode. But then there are probably people who have listened to episodes who never contacted me. And I don't know what effect I had on them. I don't know what they've done in their lives and how maybe something I said affected them, or how an episode might have given them something to think about or made them feel less alone. We are interconnected and we are interdependent, and we don't know the ripples of our lives. I mean, isn't that the whole point of It's a Wonderful Life? I've never watched that. I need to. Maybe I'll remedy that soon. He's being shown, if you weren't alive, or if you ended your life, you wouldn't know the impact that you had on other people. If you weren't here, then these other people wouldn't have been affected by you. Your life has made a difference or your life matters. I think at the end of the day, that's what we want. I think that's what so many of us want, is that we want to feel like our lives matter, that we matter to other people, that we have made a difference, that we have touched others, that we've left something behind. But we just don't always know. We don't know the effect that we can have on other people. That's why when someone is contemplating ending their lives, or they wish that they had not been born, it is important to try to remember, well, if you weren't here, you wouldn't have been able to affect the people that you've affected. You don't know how your presence has impacted the world. You just don't know. And I think the man who planted trees is kind of about that as well, is that he's planting these acorns and he doesn't know what they will become. He doesn't know which ones will flourish, which ones will become the trees. He doesn't know how these trees could affect the people who live among them. I think trees are sacred. Trees are so important in sustaining ecosystems, and also how they nourish us just by looking at them. I mean, think about the redwoods. Think about sequoias. Just looking at trees feels spiritual. And they live for such a long time, some of them. And so this one small act of planting the trees has so many far reaching consequences. He's just a humble man, and he ends up creating an entire forest. It's a really beautiful idea. That's what I love about it, is that you don't know what those seeds and what those acorns become. And even though we feel very small and we feel so insignificant against the vastness of the cosmos, the vastness of the stars and of time itself, think about billions of years. What are we? What are we against all of that? We will all be forgotten. We are all tiny and small on this earth when you compare it against the backdrop of time. It's hard to even comprehend all of the people who lived before us, who are gone, who are forgotten. We don't have control over it. We're here. We are here for a blink of an eye. It is so fleeting. It's very moving at times when I think about it. How brief we are here. How brief but powerful it is. I have that acorn on a bookshelf. I have like an altar on top of one of my bookshelves, and I have all kinds of stuff on that altar along with that acorn. I have a vase of flowers, and I have like some crystals and tarot cards, and I also have a picture of me and my dad when I was a little girl. And I just think about how he affected me, the seeds that he planted in me. I mean, isn't love a kind of acorn? Isn't love a kind of seed that we plant in each other? I think about how lucky I was to have the father that I had and the mother. I've thought about it so much lately about my upbringing and my family, me, my mom, my dad. I get very emotional about it because I was loved. I grew up in a very loving home, and in some ways, it's been hard as I've gotten older. It was very obviously painful when I lost him as a teenager. But as I've gotten older and into my 30s, and I've had trouble finding deep connection with people, and I don't have any kind of partner or romantic relationship or anything, and I never have. It's been really hard when you grew up and you had, like, I guess I could say for 16 years, the first 16 years of my life, I had this like safety and I had this loving environment, almost womb like or like this cocoon or something where I was safe. And then I lost my dad, and it's like everything was shattered. It's almost like I had this Garden of Eden or something, right? This very loving home. And then it was shattered. And I've never been able to find that safety again. I've never been able to find that kind of wholeness, I guess you could say. So the older I get, the more I realize how rare it is to have that kind of love. And I still remember it. I still remember that life. I still remember us together, the three of us. I remember that wholeness. I remember that love. It was so devastating to lose it, or to lose the physicality of it, the tangibility of it. It now exists in my memory, but I realize now that the love that my parents gave me was a kind of seed. I think what I want to do, or what I'm trying to do, is to carry that love forward in everything that I do. I think that that love is my North Star, my compass, my moral compass. They taught me how to love. They taught me how to be authentic, how to care about other people, and how to care about the world. They instilled in me this idea that all people deserve dignity and respect, and who I am and who I will become and the life that I live is a direct it is a direct consequence of the way that my parents raised me and the love that they gave me. And so when we love another person, whether it is our child, our mother, our father, our family, our friends, maybe it's um, somebody in our community, a neighbor, when we show love or we show compassion or we show care for other people, that is also planting a seed. That is also a ripple. That has an impact, the love that we give and the way that we live. And I'm grateful that I had that. And I wonder with Elziard Bouffier, our shepherd, he can't really love his wife and his son anymore. And I wonder if planting the trees is the way that he carries on that love and the way that he shows devotion to life and the way that he continues to nurture life in his grief. I do think that what this man is doing is a product of his grief and his loss. And as we know, the grief is often or always proportionate to the love. And the more we loved somebody, the more we will grieve them. I think for a long time, I didn't know what to do with the grief. And I think what I've realized is that you must do something with it. It cannot stay there. It cannot stay just trapped inside you. It can't congeal in your heart. That you have to move it. You have to work with it. You have to use it. And I think that's what I'm still trying to do, is to use it, is to use it to be more empathetic, more compassionate, to understand life better, to be kinder, to care about others, to share my voice, to put something of value and meaning out into the world. That's why I do these episodes. That's why I share the way that I do, because I don't think I can bear it otherwise. And I think with Elziard Bouffier, maybe planting the trees is how he bears the destruction of his own life. I mean, he loses the two most precious people. And I think his planting is an act of love. It is a way to continue to love life after he's lost everything. How do we love life? I mean, Mary Oliver has this beautiful poem, and she basically asks this question. There's only, what does she say? She says something like, there's only one question: how to love this world. She says how to love this world, but I would also say how to love this life when you've lost something so precious and somebody so precious. How do you continue to love life? How do you continue to stay devoted to life? How do you keep your soul and your spirit intact? I think it requires giving something, doing something with the grief and the pain. I think that's why I'm drawn to art. I think that's why I'm drawn to writing and to creating in some way. You could say that planting the trees is it's an act of creation amidst the destruction of the world wars, amidst the destruction of Elziard Bouffier's own life. You know, he was once like me, my father, and my mother. It was once him, his wife, and his son. Three became one. Three became two, in my case. What do you do when that wholeness is destroyed? What can you do? And I think Elziard Bouffier goes to nature, and he goes to life, to a devotion to life, nurturing new life, renewing life. And so perhaps that's why this story means so much to me. It's about this man finding a way to continue living and to also contribute something to the community where he lives and to take care of the earth as well. It's a kind of hope. It's a way of cultivating hope. And I do think that hope has to be cultivated and it has to be worked at. I don't know if it comes naturally for me personally. I think hope is like a spiritual practice. It is so hard to remain hopeful. I do sink into a lot of despair, particularly because of the political situation. But then I see what Palestinians are able to do in the midst of a genocide, in the midst of an occupation that's gone on for decades, over 70 years. Their resilience, their indestructible spirit, that is what gives me hope, is when I see what they have managed to salvage and to create amid the ruins of their own lives, and the way that there has been an attempt to destroy them, and yet they continue to live and to resist and to survive. And they show us a deep, deep devotion to life. And that gives me hope. They have hope as well. Hope is so sacred, isn't it? You have to fight for it. You really have to fight for it, particularly in the times we're living in with climate change, with the political situation that's ongoing and never ending. I don't feel that I live in a society that values life, that values creation. It's not a nourishing or nurturing society. I've watched it become this too. It's just very hollow and vapid and superficial. I'm shocked, honestly, at things that I see in the world today. I'm shocked at how people act. I think this is a story about hope at its core. And there's a really great afterword for the book edition of The Man Who Planted Trees. This afterword is written by Norma Goodrich, and she writes about the topic of hope and Jean Giono's feelings about hope. She writes, quote, Giono termed his confidence in the future espérance, or hopefulness, not espoir, which is the masculine word for hope, but espérance, the feminine word designating the permanent state or condition of living one's life in hopeful tranquility. Whence springs this well of espérance? Giono wondered. Hopefulness must spring, he decided, from literature and the profession of poetry. Authors only write, so to be fair about it, they have an obligation to profess hopefulness in return for their right to live and write. The poet must know the magical effect of certain words: hay, grass, meadows, willows, rivers, firs, mountains, hills. People have suffered so long inside the walls that they have forgotten to be free, Giono thought. Human beings were not created to live forever in subways and tenements, for their feet long to stride through tall grass or slide through running water. The poet's mission is to remind us of beauty, of trees swaying in the breeze, or pines groaning under snow in the mountain passes, of wild white horses galloping across the surf. You know, Giono said to me, there are also times in life when a person has to rush off in pursuit of hopefulness. Unquote. I love that. I love that idea that hope is something that you pursue, that it's something worth seeking out. And I also love that he felt like artists and writers should be hopeful and that should be part of their work, is that they should really remind us of the beauty of life and connect us to the beauty of life. They have an obligation to profess hopefulness. That's the way that Goodrich puts it. I find this really interesting. I have gotten into animated films in my 30s. I would say the last few years I've gotten pretty intensely interested in animation. I'm by no means an expert, but The Man Who Planted Trees is one of my favorite animated films. I know that I haven't lingered as much on the visuals of the film, but I do think that it is beautifully rendered and beautifully drawn. I guess I've focused more in this episode about the story itself. That's what is so powerful for me. And the version of the film I was able to watch on YouTube is not like the clearest, highest quality, but I do think that it's a beautiful film. And so I've gotten into animation lately, and just recently I went through the entire catalog of Studio Ghibli. I watched like 20 films in a couple of months. I was watching one every night and just falling in love with them and discovering a lot of favorites. My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service. So I've entered into the world of Miyazaki. I don't know as much about him as I would like to, and hopefully I can learn more about Miyazaki. But I find it interesting that some of the clips that I've seen of him online, and this has come up in some discussions that I've also seen about him, is that he comes off like more of like a cynical or pessimistic person in terms of his personality. I haven't watched any documentaries about him or Studio Ghibli yet, but I've just seen clips from some of them where he says things where he's just like really unhappy with the world and he seems a bit more pessimistic. And this is sort of in stark contrast to his art and to his films. I think, you know, obviously many of his films are masterpieces. I think My Neighbor Totoro is one of the greatest films ever made personally. It is almost spiritual for me. When I watched My Neighbor Totoro this year, I was blown away by it, and it's by far my favorite Studio Ghibli. My top used to be Only Yesterday, and it got knocked down. It got knocked to the second position because I think there's something very magical and spiritual in My Neighbor Totoro. And so it doesn't actually surprise me that Miyazaki, the man, might be pessimistic, but his art is more hopeful or is more optimistic or life affirming or uplifting. I think that it makes sense. And I think that the art may not always match the artist. That you can maybe be a pessimistic person, but try to create art that is more optimistic or more hopeful. I think the act of creating art is connected to hope. Why else are you creating it? Why else are you creating something and sharing it with other people? Because you're trying to change others. And there's hope in that. I think that's an act of hope or an act of faith to try to affect other people, to try to move them, to try to make them feel something, to try to tell them a story that could affect them. I do think that the act of creating art is a hopeful act. And so it doesn't surprise me that he might be more of a pessimistic person that doesn't totally align with the art that he creates. So I tend to agree with Giono that I think that art does give us hope, or it can. Now, of course, there is art that is more devastating and bleak, and there's certainly pessimistic art, but I would still argue that the experience of that art can give you hope. That the experience of watching a film, even if it's bleak, even if it's Bellatar and Satan Tango, or it's something very heavy or sad, that your experience of that art can be life affirming because there could be something in the art that speaks to you and that helps you in your life, that makes you feel less alone or makes you feel seen or just reminds you that there is something worth living for. Because that's how I feel about art. It's one of the things that I live for, and it is something that gives me hope. And so Jean Giono writing this story, The Man Who Planted Trees, was a kind of seed that he was planting as well. You know, telling this story about this man who didn't exist, but who gives us a model or a blueprint for a life that is good, a life that is worth living. What do we live for? How do we put one foot in front of the other every day? We have to all ask ourselves that. What do I want to contribute? Who do I want to be? Why am I waking up every day? Why am I here? Nobody can answer any of those questions except for you. And sometimes I do feel like I'm not living as authentically as I should. I feel like I'm not living the life that I am capable of living. I often feel like I'm kind of haunted by an unlived life because a lot of things did not work out for me. I had a lot of dreams and none of them have none of them have come true, unfortunately. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to travel. I wanted to publish books. I wanted to be somebody in the world. I wanted to matter, I guess, and create. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be someone, I think. And that really hasn't happened for me. And so I think there's all this untapped potential or this unlived life that I am haunted by personally. I just sometimes think, now that I'm in my mid 30s and I look at my life and I'm like, what have I done with my life? What have I done with all this time? this time that my father didn't get to have. I don't have a child. I don't have any children. I don't have a great career. I don't have like a lot of things that kind of define a valuable life. I don't have a partner. I don't have a big family. I don't have status. I don't have like all of these things because I went through a lot of trauma and it affected my ability to function in the world and to just live. And so I feel like I have this unlived life. I feel like there's so much that I haven't done. I feel like I'm behind other people. I feel like I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what my greater purpose or my greater meaning is, but I'm someone who deeply yearns for that. Like, I wish I could wake up every day and feel like this is my purpose and I am living in alignment with what I'm meant to do on this earth. I don't feel that. I mean, this podcast for a while was very meaningful for me and mattered to me, but it didn't go anywhere. It didn't really like connect with a lot of people. I had dreams for it for a while. Like I wanted it to be bigger. I wanted it to like maybe lead to something, like lead to opportunities or connections, or I wanted to go to film festivals. I wanted to like really be able to share my passion and my love for film and to be able to support myself through it potentially. That was like a big dream of mine and it just did not happen. It didn't connect with enough people for that to ever be a possibility. And it's been difficult for me to kind of accept that of like, oh, okay, this is not going to be what I wanted it to be. I'm not going to be able to have the impact or the influence that I had hoped for. I never I just never got a following. I never got like a big enough audience to turn it into any kind of career or to for it to lead to connections or opportunities or something like that. And that was really hard. It's been hard for me to kind of accept that, but it wasn't meant to be. And so that's why I just kind of occasionally do episodes because I don't have the time. I don't have the time or the energy to keep putting out episodes and stuff. But I'm grateful for the people who have come across the episodes and who have found it and stuff like that. But I feel this sense of like, well, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to be living? And I guess sometimes I can get wrapped up in those questions and then I forget to actually live. I forget to actually be in my life and to be connected to my life in the day in, day out. And I think something like The Man Who Planted Trees, I think this story, both the book and the animated film, I think it creates this space or this container. I feel like the way I approach film is like I see film as a container at times. And that container can hold our feelings and dreams and experiences that a film can like be a space that you enter into and it can bring up all these thoughts and feelings and ideas. And so the film is the container that holds all of that. It holds what you bring to it. And so The Man Who Planted Trees, that's what it makes me think about. It makes me think about these really big questions about what kind of life I want to live, who I want to be, what I want to contribute, how I want to make that contribution. And I'm one of those people where I do want a deeper meaning. How do we get out of bed every day? How do we put one foot in front of the other? How does, Elziard Bouffier keep living after his wife and his son are gone? he has to have a greater purpose. And I think planting these trees becomes that greater purpose. His devotion to life, his desire to nurture life, these become his larger purpose. He finds that purpose through nature, through being a steward of nature and of the earth. And I love that. And so he finds that greater purpose. He finds like something to live for. He's kind of a lonely figure. I find that kind of interesting. He doesn't really live with anybody. He has his sheep for a little while, and he's kind of separate from the community. Even though he's planting these trees to try to help it, he seems separate at the same time. Maybe it's his sorrow that kind of separates him or marks him a little bit. He's on a mission. He's on a mission to nurture life, and that becomes his greater purpose. That's what allows him to keep living. And I think for me, I don't have that. I think I've struggled for so long to find that. Like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? How can I have the effect on other people that I would like to have? How can I contribute something of meaning and value? And I don't feel that that's totally answered. But I do feel like these episodes are at least some kind of offering, that maybe these are little seeds or acorns that I'm throwing out into the universe or into the world, and people come across them. And so that has meaning. That has value. But I think that I'm someone always kind of searching for that greater meaning or purpose. I don't know if I've hit on it yet. um, but I love that idea of being devoted to something, being devoted to life. And I do find a lot of solace through nature. I find so much comfort through it. And I recently got a bird feeder for the first time. I've never really done this before. I just got like a simple tube type of bird feeder that has these things where the birds can land, and then they can eat the seeds that you put into the bird feeder. And I don't know why I did it. I was just kind of interested in it, and I really like birds and I like bird song and stuff. And it took a little while, like a few days or maybe a week, but finally the birds started to use it and to congregate on it. And I cannot tell you how satisfying and beautiful it is to me to know that these birds are being nourished by those seeds that I've put out. I just love the feeling of it, of knowing that I have given nourishment to these birds and that they have a place to go and they can eat and then they can fly off. And like, I've contributed to their lives. Like, I've nurtured them in some way and fed them and like done that. It just makes me feel good. Like, I have a dog, I'd like to have a cat one day. Um and so I'm grateful to have my dog, and to take care of her. But there's something about wild animals, I guess, and like, that are not domesticated. You don't own them or anything. They just kind of go off, and you don't have any like personal connection with these animals or with these birds. And I feel like I've just contributed something just through feeding some birds. I don't know where they go, I don't know what they do, but I was one small part of their existence, or their lives. I like the idea of just nourishing somebody. I like the idea of nurturing something. And it's just really like beautiful to me. And I was sitting outside today, and one of the birds landed on the bird feeder right in front of me. I couldn't believe it. And I started to cry. It was the first time that had happened. I have to look at them from like the window. And there was this beautiful bird right in front of me. And I felt so moved by it. And I just started to cry because I felt in that moment so connected to life. I think that's what nature gives us, is that it gives us this very visceral, immediate feeling of being connected to life. And the thing about nature is that it goes on without us. It exists parallel to us, but we are not important to it. Like those birds fly around and they take no notice of me. You're not really necessary to the natural world. Like the birds and the rabbits and even the snakes and the possums where I live, all kinds of stuff in the rural South. Um, all these animals exist and you don't know what they're up to, but you're not necessary to it. Their lives go on irrespective of you. It's this world that is like it's it's there, it's parallel, but it goes on without you. Whether you're there or not, those birds are going to keep flying. The butterflies are going to land on the flowers, and that's also what makes nature very scary, is because nature's indifferent to us. That's why it's scary when somebody's attacked by an animal. That animal doesn't know what you are. It doesn't it doesn't separate you from anything else. Like a shark attack, the shark doesn't know that you're not a seal. It doesn't care. It's indifferent to you. It's almost hostile to you. And so nature's can be kind of this alien thing too, where I feel like, rabbits and birds and all of that, they're unknowable. They're unknowable because they're not humans. So you don't have any frame of reference of like, well, what's going on in the mind of a tiger? When I was little, I loved watching nature documentaries. I would watch stuff about big cats and tigers and lions and whales and dolphins. And I mean, the ocean is so vast and so interesting. And I just realized, like, wow, all of this is going on. And we don't even like know all the species of animals that are out there. It's just this world that goes on without you. Trees that live for hundreds of years, and there's such a magnitude about it. So much larger than you. That's, I think, what nature makes you feel too. It's just so much bigger than you. And you're so small in comparison to all that. And you're not necessary to it. They don't care. The birds don't care about you. They don't have any personal connection to you. And I just think nature really connects us to all that, of just life. It's really beautiful to me. I can't believe I cried because I was looking at some birds, because a bird came kind of close to me on my bird feeder. But I just love the idea that I was helping that bird. And it's totally like selfless. I mean, I didn't get anything in return. It's just, I think when you take care of an animal or you take care of nature, it's like you're just giving to give. It's so pure. Like you're just giving them food or you're planting things because you want to. What does the shepherd get out of planting the trees? He will not really be able to experience a lot of those trees. He may never see them. He does it for the people of the future. That's what he does it for. It's really altruistic. It's very selfless. It's just for the act itself. It's for knowing that these trees will help that region, will help that community. He doesn't want to be remembered for it. He's not out telling everybody, well, I'm planting these trees. He just does it because he wants to. Even when there's world wars happening, he continues to plant the trees because he believes in life and he wants to be connected to life. And that's his mission and that's his purpose. And that's the meaning that he's created, is to plant those trees. I just love it, you know? And there's people all across this world who are planting those acorns in different ways. They're planting it through their communities and what they create, what they share, what they give back. Some of them we know, some of them we don't. And there's all kinds of ways to plant those acorns and to put something better out into the world. And I think this film and this story makes me think about the impact that I want to have, or what I want to contribute, who I want to be, and how I want to live. It's just very powerful, very like life changing, life affirming. And I feel so changed by it. I just feel so affected by this story. And I wouldn't have even come across the book itself without the animated film. The animated film, I think, is much more famous. It's a story that revitalizes me, just as he plants the acorns and tries to revitalize the region. When you take in this story, it's revitalizing to your spirit. And I think we need that at times. We can get into places maybe of pessimism or despair. And I think that art can be one of the more powerful ways that we can be revitalized, and we can feel our spirits get raised again, and we definitely need that in the world today. No doubt about it. That's all I wanted to say about this film. I love it deeply. It's a very simple story about a simple man who does very simple acts of planting trees. And yet, the ripple effects of those actions are profound and far reaching. So I hope that you liked this episode. I appreciate anybody who listened to it. And until next time, keep watching great films.